Dzień dobry, Kaja Bryx. Goszczę dzisiaj w Oslo i mam przyjemność rozmawiać z panem Didrikiem Söderlindem ze Stowarzyszenia Norweskich Humanistów, które opowie nam o sytuacji humanistów w tym kraju. Good afternoon, this is Kaja Bryx for Racjonalista.tv in Oslo, having a chance to talk to Mr. Didrik Schjerven Søderlind, who is the senior advisor in the ideology department of the Norwegian Humanist Association.
Not
senior advisor. Could you tell us first what is an ideology department in the Norwegian Humanist Association?
I guess, in a sense, we would be the theologians of the organization. We work with developing humanism as a worldview, Weltanschauung, lifestance. We also work a little bit participate in public debate, give lectures, engage in discussions, write things of that nature.
So you're all philosophers?
I'm most certainly not. I'm an old journalist. I used to be a science writer. Had a lot of interest in culture, and that's how I ended up here. But some of my colleagues are philosophers.
Mm-hmm. So your job is mainly about explaining humanist values to people, creating some manuals, or being the spokesman of the movement in the media, or what exactly would be your main expertise about?
All those things, actually. Pretty much sums up what I do. I also do a lot of interfaith dialogue work. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book with a friend of mine who is a priest in the Norwegian church, and we wrote the book together, and we've been touring it around the country to engage in constructive debates with people of other faiths. And I was also the columnist for Norway's big Christian daily for 7 years, and I've done a lot of that kind of work. I also give lectures about different things. One thing that I've worked a lot with is extremism. Norway has had a problem with extremism, especially in 2011 with the attack on Utøya, where 69 young Norwegians were murdered by a far-right extremist. And the scene surrounding the Humanist Union and the publications that we have and the publisher that we have produced a lot of material about extremism, things to do with racism, conspiracy theories, things like that.
Is it motivated by religion in a way, or it's more a different kind of ideology, political ideology?
I would say it's more motivated by hatred of religion, actually, because hatred of Muslims is a problem in Norway. Also, anti-Semitism is a phenomenon. But the religiously motivated extremism is something that we haven't done so much with, because there's been a lot of good research done on that. And that I'm thinking about Islamist extremism. We haven't produced so much material about that because there are very good academic circles who take care of that.
The Islamic extremism.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good material produced about that. So we don't have to do it. But for various reasons, we developed a lot of knowledge and competence about conspiracy theories and far-right extremism in a time frame where nobody else was working with it. So when Utøya happened in 2011, nobody had really done research on this for 10 years in Norway, because the far-right scene was quite dead, but we kept an eye on it. So suddenly we were the ones who had the expertise, which came in good use in the court proceedings against Anders Behring Breivik.
Well, these were very tragic events
Yes.
discussed all over Europe. So I can only say I'm sorry
It's
about that. Let's hope it's not going to repeat itself in other countries too,
Yes.
because we do have extremisms of all kinds actually raising now in Europe. But maybe getting back to
Yes.
Norway, could you tell us briefly what kind of religions and life stances there are in Norway, and more or less what's the proportion between them?
we are only a fraction of that, but I think we represent many more people than our members in our organization. There's also minority religions, like we have people with a Muslim background and also practicing Muslims. We have a tiny minority of Jews, because most of them were murdered during the war. And there's also a pretty thriving alternative religious scene, as in New Agey, alternative medicine types.
What kind of percentage of the population that might be?
It's very
or
hard.
You don't have
I
numbers?
don't have any numbers, and I think it's very hard to measure.
But they are visible.
They are very visible, especially since a Norwegian princess is very heavily involved in that scene and used to run an academy to teach people to talk to angels. And yes, it's very embarrassing for for us Norwegians, I must say. There's also a lot of Christian minority groups. The Catholics are a small group in Norway, but growing. There's also Orthodox Christians, and there's also a healthy subculture, I would say, perhaps, of Protestant groups that are outside the Norwegian church, like Pentecostals, Quakers, and streams like that, Baptists.
The Norwegian church is Lutheran church, right?
Yes, it is evangelical Lutheran.
Is the king the head of the church, or it's not? It doesn't have that relation to the state?
He does have that relation, so that means that he has to be a member of the Norwegian church, which is one thing that we disagree with. We think the Norwegian royal family should be allowed to choose their own faith.
Well, yes, I agree too. They are humans after all.
Yeah.
So they should have their right. But at the moment, they are still legally bound by this.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about how the relation of the state church with the state changed in the recent years? Because I know that there has been a progress in separating one from the other.
It is a process, and there has been some progress, but it's still not complete. I think the church needs to. They're trying to develop a good internal democracy, which I encourage. So it was kind of weird to sit on Twitter as a humanist and encourage people who are members of the church to go vote in the internal elections of the church, for example. But I did. I wish the church well, but I wish also that it should be separated from the state. I think that will benefit both Norway as a country, because I believe in the principle of separation of church and state. But I also think it would be good for the Norwegian church not to have its theology dictated by politicians. I think.
And this is the case now?
Yes, well, to some extent. An irony in Norway is that many people, especially on the left, who don't really like the church that much, they want the church to be a state church so that the state can control it. Whereas I personally tend to like churches more when churches are churches, and then that they are free and that they don't have to be subservient to politicians.
Well, I do share your opinion.
Yeah.
So, and what's the humanist situation? So, are you considered one of the religions officially? Do you have a similar status, or not really?
Yes, we have. I mean, we are not a religion, obviously.
Yes. Well.
Even though there's a lot of similarities, and I don't define my humanism as in opposition to religion, but I think of it as a complement to it. But yes, we are recognized by the state and by society in the same way that, say, the Catholic and Protestant churches are. We get tax refunds from the state to help finance our activities. We are used as a hearing instance for new laws, and so on. We are also cooperating with religious groups in a sort of umbrella organization, so that we cooperate with, for example, the Catholics, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Sikhs, and other religious groups vis-a-vis the Norwegian authorities, which I think is a very constructive situation and has both helped us and also helped Norwegian society, because it has I think it has prevented a lot of unnecessary conflict.
So this cooperation was centered around the non-discrimination policies?
Yes, but also in the interest of fostering good dialogue. I think that I think it's important to talk to people who think differently from you and believe differently from you, and try to get along with them. I think that's very important.
Well, this is really great that you are doing this kind of work, because I think that in many countries, well, in Poland in particular, but in other European countries that I've managed to see what kind of work the humanists do, this is an element that's kind of missing. I personally believe this is very important, because there is so much hatred everywhere, and people kind of forget how to talk to each other and forget that there is this common ground. And being a humanist, I think you realize this more than other people in a way, because your worldview tells you about respect for other human beings, right? So one of the good things that we should do would be actually entering this kind of dialogue. And this is great. So I think you will be a source of inspiration for us for our work too. Could you tell us a bit more about the state church? Does it have like any particular privileges that other religions don't have? I also heard this story, I'm not sure if this is true, that children are automatically subscribed sometimes to the state church once they are born? Or is
yes,
this
if their parents are members and things like that. There's a lot of bad practices that really should stop. And I think that the church wants to have stopped too, but it's difficult for them. They have these old membership records and things. So it's difficult for them to be on top of things all the time. So I have some understanding for that, but I do think that the church needs to be freer, and that all this positive discrimination of the church has to stop. I don't think it's good for either Norwegian society or the church, really.
And how do you see the odds for that in the near future?
I think they are pretty good, actually, because I think we are slowly moving there. And I think that as the church gets more secure in its role as a free entity, I think it will go well. I also see a lot of interesting things happening among Christians in Norway, because I think even if on paper Christians are in the majority in Norway, I think a lot of them feel that they are actually a minority, and that they are not well regarded by many people.
Christians?
Yes, sadly, which I think is sad, because I think many of them are very good people. And I think a lot of them are preparing to be more like a counterculture.
But didn't you say that around 80% of population actually is part of the state church?
Yes, but when you actually start asking people, do you believe in God? Do you believe Christ is the Son of God, for example, then that percentage drops like a rock. Mm. And I think that people who are actively believing open Christians, some places in Norway are in a minority. In Oslo, for example, they are. And in the kind of way that I grew up, I didn't really have open Christians, or people who talked about Christianity around me. I had and I think that, I mean, I'm almost 50, so I'm not young anymore, but I think many young people now have that experience. And some Christians in Oslo have said, for example, things like, when I have guests over, I hide my Bible, because they don't want people to think that they're weird, because they read the Bible. And I, as a humanist, I think that's sad, because I think people should be respected if they're Christians. But I think that is the reality for many people. They don't feel like they are in the majority. I think a lot of them feel that their faith is something that other people look down on. Personally, I try to work against that, to create understanding for Christians, but I think it's a part of the situation.
This is very interesting.
Norway and Poland are like night and day in this respect.
Oh, that's for sure.
I would say.
Although we also have a lot of passive Christians, if you will. I mean, people who are considered Catholics, but according to the church statistics, only around 40% actually goes to the church.
Yeah.
So it's not, I mean, the numbers don't really show how many people believe. So this is similar, but for sure we have many more believers in Poland.
The difference, though, is that in Catholicism, belief is less important than in Protestantism, because in Protestant Christianity, faith is all important, whereas a Catholic can be more sort of passively practicing or something. It's much more important. I mean, the Lutheran doctrine is that Christianity is determined by faith alone and Scripture alone, which means that it's less dramatic for a Catholic to not be so active. So that is a bit of a difference. So it's hard to compare the situations exactly, but I totally get your point. I do. But I mean, if you want an example of the kind of environment I grew up in, when I went to high school, we had 2 gay men come to our class, and I went to a sort of a radical school, and everybody was super encouraging that these 2 young gay men were open about who they were, and everybody encouraged them, until it turned out that one of them was also a Christian. And then the entire mood changed, and everybody wanted to, what about the Crusades, and a lot of quite stupid anti-Christian nonsense came out. So that's something that I try to discourage.
In a way, the most popular is a non-belief in Norway, or is there this particular hatred towards the state church or the Christianity in general?
I wouldn't say hatred at all, but I would say that in some socio-cultural environments, you will be looked down on if you're a Christian. But that's depending on where in the country you are. If you are in Oslo, I think being a Pentecostal in Oslo is probably a bit like being an open atheist in Poland. That you are sort of, people think you're weird and perhaps a little scary. But if you, on the west coast, for example, and the south coast, the Bible Belt of Norway, the situation is dramatically different. And being Christian is totally mainstream and very respected. Even though, of course, you have then, because it is a Protestant country mostly, you have a lot of different Christian groups who disagree on a lot of things and might not like each other that much.
Could you tell us a bit more about humanists and humanist work? What kind of work does the association do? What are you mostly known for in Norway?
I think we are mostly known for our ceremonies. So we have name giving, which is a bit like a baptism. We have confirmations, which are extremely popular. 1 in 5 kids in Norway are now choosing a humanist confirmation. And confirmations are a very big thing in Norway. It's a huge part of our culture. We also do weddings, which are quite popular, and we also do funerals. And a lot of people encounter us through those ceremonies, where they hopefully get a positive impression of us. We are also actively involved in public debate and in cultural things, writing about things, appearing in the media. My colleague, the philosopher Kaja, she is a regular in one of Norway's most popular radio programs about things to do with values and faith and life stances, for example. So she's heard by a lot of people. We do a lot of things that a church would do, I guess. We are also involved in aid work, but we don't have really separate aid organizations so much as we contribute to already existing organizations. One of the causes that we have been involved with, and that's been one of my pet causes as well, that I've sent considerable amount of my own money to, has been helping Yazidi women who have been slaves for the Islamic State in Syria. So that's one thing that we have done a lot of work in.
Great, because they really need help.
Yes, and they are they're a group that everybody misunderstands. So it's very important to show solidarity with them. They're some of the most traumatized women on the planet.
I would expect so.
Yeah.
Well, this is all very interesting, and I think a little bit different than I expected, because we hear all about this big humanist movement, but I think we perceive it through our own eyes. So as a humanist movement that works for secularism and is somehow opposed to a religion, etc. And actually, according to what you're saying, your life stance, it is actually known, right, to people. So people do know what humanism is about. So it's more about...
It's mainstream in Norway.
It's more about actually giving particular opinions on certain subjects that would be popular at the moment, and actually trying to find a way to enter into dialogue with other people, other religions, right?
I think humanism is like a religion in the sense that it's a world religion now. And just as Islam is different in Malaysia, Saudi Arabia and Morocco, humanism is different in different countries. Humanism in India is different from humanism in Norway. And Norway has some cultural things where, for example, we tend to think that pushing your faith on people is vulgar. You don't become popular here if you go around trying to force Jesus on people. So my Christian friends tend to be more subtle in their approach. And just as, the sort of very loudmouthed new atheist critique of religion hasn't been very popular in Norway. People think it doesn't fit very well with the Norwegian mentality. We tend to have a more live and let live relationship with religion here, which I feel is a huge privilege. because in some places of the world these are questions of life or death, whereas in Norway they're something that many people don't even bother about. I mean, I've never in my entire life had a bad negative reaction from me not believing in God, which would not be the case at all if, for example, I lived in the United States. I could be thrown out of my home if my parents found out that I wasn't religious when I was young. In Saudi Arabia, I could be killed. In Poland, there's probably also some stigma surrounding atheism.
There can be a family drama, definitely, especially if you come from a smaller town or village. Then yes, people tend to be still very conservative about that. It is changing very much, though. So,
on the other hand, I've been told by several Christians that I'm more dangerous to their faith than I would be if I was more aggressive and anti-religious, because they think I'm so nice and moral.
You're a perfect ambassador of humanism, then.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I think they find me more. At least what they tell me is that they find me more dangerous because they listen to what I say. Whereas if I told them that they're idiots because they believe in God, I mean, nobody changes their opinion if you say they're an idiot, you know.
So people do actually change their religion and become humanists instead of following certain church, or is it more that the children of humanists are the new members of your association?
There's both. We have third, fourth generation humanists in Norway now, who have been, because the humanist organization has been going since 1956. There's a lot of people who just sort of follow in the footsteps of their parents, which is good. There's also people who break with their parents. I mean, there are people from humanist homes who become religious, which is also fine. People should be free to choose their own religion. But there's also people who break with religion, of course. And that tends to go mostly, I think, going from being religious to being non-religious. I think that's the main trend. And most of them have very few problems with it, because Norway tends to be a bit lax about these things. But others have horrible, traumatizing stories. If they've come from a very controlling religious environment, breaking out can be a huge deal. And if you come from a minority new religious movement like the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, you might lose your entire family.
Yes.
But the former leader of the humanist youth movement is the son of the leader of the council of the Norwegian Church. So it's, and that was completely undramatic. His mother just encouraged him. Because to her the most important thing was that her son was a moral and well-reflected human being. So it works all kinds of ways.
And are you having any issues with the Muslim community in Norway? Are many of them extremists, or how does it work?
Most Muslims in Norway are quite moderate. Perhaps some of them are quite conservative, but the radicals are quite few, and we have nothing to do with them. But we are actively involved in dialogue work with the moderate and constructive elements of the Muslim community in Norway. It's also easy to over-religify the Muslim community, because many of them are not very religious at all. But when you think of them as Muslims, you already start thinking of them as very religious and very devout, whereas that is not the case at all. And many young Muslims that you meet will say things like, being a Muslim is just about being a good person. A guy I used to train with just said that. So he wanted to work with old people. And that was his way of being a Muslim.
No, this is great, and actually if they live in a country which allows them to drift away from the extreme Islamism towards actually humanist lifestance, this, whether they don't have to fear that they would be sentenced to death when they say in the end that they don't believe in God. Well, this is really great.
Or they can just keep on being nice people and also be Muslims.
Yeah, of course. It's not. I did not
That's
suggest
also,
that
no,
all
no,
of them
no.
have to
No.
convert. Just saying that in Muslim countries in general, people don't really have the choice.
Absolutely.
So it is great to provide them with the choice here, and then if they choose to practice their religion, this is their choice, right? As long as they are not extremists, and so.
The Muslim Council of Norway that I have criticized a lot, but I will say this, that they have openly supported the right to change your religion, which I think is a very good thing. And of course it's a very basic thing that all decent people should support.
Yes, but it's not that
but
basic
it's good
for this
Yeah,
religion
no,
representatives. That's
no.
why it's a big thing, I guess.
Precisely.
But I've seen a lot of women wearing burqas or the chadar, full chadar in here in Oslo.
A lot.
Well, in the 2 days that I've been here, I've come across a lot as my experience. So.
But how much is a lot? I very rarely see them, and I work in this area.
Really?
How many have you seen? Like 2 or 5 or 10?
No, like more than 10 in a couple of hours. So that's what I was a bit surprised, because
that surprises me too, because I almost never see them. And I eat lunch at a sort of Muslim town here every day. That's strange.
Because I was not surprised by seeing Muslim women, because of course in Poland we don't have that many, although actually in Wrocław we do, but I've been a lot to Brussels, so of course there are a lot of Muslim people there, but I rarely see them wearing the full chadar, and here I've seen already more than in Brussels. That's why I was surprised, but
there are a few, but nobody knows how many there are. I would be surprised if there's more than 50 in the entire country.
But you don't have any issue with the schools and the Muslim girls in the schools and their clothes. You don't have these issues about what they can wear, what they cannot wear.
We've had a big debate about children who wear hijabs, but a lot of Muslims would agree with us there that girls who haven't entered puberty yet should not wear the hijab, for example. And when it comes to the full face veil, the niqab, I don't know of any prominent spokesperson for the Muslim community who supports that, because I think they see it as a PR disaster for Norwegian Muslims, which it is. And it's interesting, when the Norwegian state broadcasting did a documentary on Muslim girls who wear the full face veil, they showed scenes where they walk down the street and they're verbally attacked in the street by other Muslims who say that this does not belong in Norway, this is Saudi nonsense, and this is a disaster for Muslims. This hurts Muslims in Norway. And I've talked to Muslim women who have tried to wear the hijab and wear the niqab, the full face veil, who stopped precisely because of that. Okay, they got so much abuse in the street from Muslims.
Well, the abuse is not good at all. But I appreciate the fact that they would rather have it in a more secular form. So this is.
I think their assessment is right, that the wearing full face veil in Norway, it seems scary. It seems alien. It signifies a will not to integrate. And personally, I don't have any research to back this up, but personally I tend to think that if a person wears the full face veil, that tends to correlate with them having extremely reactionary or radical Islamic beliefs.
Yes, this is why
yeah.
I asked you this, but I must have been very lucky to actually come across so many of them.
I'm very surprised actually, but maybe you've been doing a lot of sightseeing in the East End, where they tend to be.
Possible.
Yeah,
yes.
Where they tend to be, because I very rarely see them.
Maybe I was there at the right time. Well, anyway, Norway seems to be a nice country to live then. Because you don't have this much hatred, it seems, or still these extreme groups that you've mentioned at the beginning are very concerning.
Yes.
The presence is still strong there?
They don't have to have a strong presence to be dangerous. And quite recently we had a terrorist attack in the west, right to the west of Oslo, where a guy tried to attack a mosque, but he was overpowered by an ex-Pakistani serviceman who overpowered him when he came in. But he was ready to commit a mass murder in that mosque after killing his sister, because she was adopted and therefore not racially pure in his eyes. So we do have those groups, and they are very, very dangerous. And we try to work against that by informing people about it.
Well, then we wish you good luck with that.
Thank you.
And so I kind of think that humanists must feel here at home. So this is something that we can look up for.
I think there's several. I mean, humanism is mainstream in Norway, and there's several reasons for why it's a big mainstream thing. One reason is that we're recognized and we have the same economic possibilities as the big churches do. Which of course helps a lot, but I think another reason is that humanism, it accords well with how the average Norwegian thinks and lives. So I think that's one reason why it's a big thing. But I think humanism needs to be different things in different countries. And I don't necessarily think that Polish humanism should be the same thing as the Norwegian one, and probably it won't, because you're shaped by different historical factors, different cultural influences. Also, I think a humanism that arises in a country shaped by Catholicism would be different from one shaped in a country shaped by Protestantism, for example.
Yes, probably it will.
So I think Polish humanists should find their own humanism. And not try to make a carbon copy of anything else. You need to find your own way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.